Welcome to Progress in Practice, where we explore what it really takes to build and sustain a professional service business. The hard lessons, the smart moves, the uncomfortable truths. Because success leaves clues, if you're willing to look for them. I'm Charlie Redding. Let's dive in. So Paul, welcome to the Progress in Practice podcast. Really looking forward to chatting to you. And as you come from the financial planning world, which was my sort of historic world, I'm looking forward to chatting to you and finding out some of the wisdom that you picked up along the way. So to kick things off, let's introduce you to those people that are listening. And so the question I like to start with is, who do you serve? How do you help them? But what makes you different?
Oh, that's a tough hitting one to start with, Charlie, I have to say. If I can answer that by going back 27 years to when I first started the business, it might give you a little bit of background and I'll get to the point. So back in 1998, I started Sound Financial Planning. And at the time, my business partner and I were working for a big life assurance and pensions company. We wanted to be independent and we wanted to run our own ship and so on. But we also, probably more importantly, wanted to give people proper fee-based financial planning. So back then, as you may remember, although you're clearly a lot younger than me, you'll remember back then financial advice was pretty much around the sale of products. And whether you're independent or not didn't matter. Products were how people earned their commissions, how they earned their salary. And we thought that was fundamentally wrong. Not only were clients at the time being served by the sale of a product, also different products and different companies paid different rates of commission. So we wanted to set up something that pushed all that to one side and was proper what I call fee-based financial planning, using cash flow modeling and the like, which is standard these days. And so, yeah, ever since then, we've sort of, and it's evolved over time. It wasn't, perfect from day one and whatever. We've adapted it over time, but we've got to a stage where we have deep and meaningful conversations with clients about money and how it plays a role in their life. Money is just a means to an end. So therefore it's, what is that end? What is the purpose of the money? What are your values around money? How do you see money? How does it show up in your life? And then putting a financial plan together. That's got absolutely nothing to do with any financial services products. So that's very much how we set up the business and how it's evolved over time.
Brilliant. And I love that. And so I thought with Efficient Portfolio, we were fairly early on the fee-based journey because we started fee-based financial planning in 2006. But you were obviously ahead of that time. You would have been one of a handful of firms at that time that was doing fee-based and rather than commission-based. What story best explains why you made that decision to do what you did there? Is there a single story that you thought, do you know what, this is why I need to do what I'm going to do?
There wasn't a single story. I think it was just simply the case that, when you put yourself in the client's shoes, I always use the analogy. If you go to a doctor, that doctor only gets paid by writing out prescriptions. Guess what you're going to come out with? You're going to come out of the surgery with a prescription for some tablets or drugs or whatever it might be. And that was very much the model at the time. So we looked at it from a client's point of view and said, well, hang on a minute, you may not need you might come to us and it might simply be something that you need that isn't a financial services product. So why should you, feel under pressure to sign on the dotted line to buy a financial services product when in reality it may be you don't need any of that, So there wasn't any one specific thing that happened that made us think that way. It was just at the time it didn't feel right. We were also big followers of Paul Etheridge. I'm sure you know Paul from his days at Presswood. I mean, he sadly passed away a few years ago now. He was sort of the, known as the sort of grandfather of financial planning and cash flow modeling. And we followed Paul at the time and saw his way of working and thought, wow, this is very different. Not only did he have cash flow modeling by his software, which was Presswood and is still going today, but the way he charged clients retainer fees and so on was very, very different. And we just saw that and thought that's got to serve people better than just flogging them products, whether you're independent or not. So that was the sort of reason. There wasn't any specific event that made us think that way.
But it's interesting because I had the same realization, and when I set up Efficient Portfolio in 2006, I'd been giving financial advice for 7 years, and it was chatting to it was actually David Batchelor, who was my coach at the time, and he kind of explained this. I was like, in a similar way to you, that clients were really always skeptical of commissions, weren't they? They really were. And as
Yeah.
soon as it kind of was played out in that, well, this is how clients see what you're doing, it just made complete sense to me. So I think it's brilliant that you saw that, and I think it makes it makes financial planning a proper financial planning, as you say, as opposed to pushing products. If you were to go back to that younger self when as you set up that business, what advice would you give your younger self that you now know that help you on that journey and become successful even quicker?
Oh, yeah, that's a toughie. I think as regards to my younger self in general, I would just be a lot more, what's the word I'm looking for? I was a bit too shy and reserved as a young person. And I was a bit sort of worried about, how things might go, what people might think. Yeah, I didn't have a great deal of confidence. We knew what we wanted to do with the business, but we were very new to it and it was a totally different world. I remember the first sort of retainer fees that we charged were £30 a month. I remember sort of gripping the seat as I said £30 a month and thinking, oh my God. So I suppose to answer the question, I would go back and say, look, this is what you do. This is what it's worth. It's worth every penny. Stick a naught on the end of that £30 a month figure or whatever, and be confident in the fact that you're providing a very, very good service and you're worth every penny. Because there was very few clients back then who said no, and then you quickly realize, actually, I think we're a bit too cheap here. So yeah, so my advice to myself would be a bit more perhaps courageous in terms of the way you believe and market yourself in that regard.
I think that's interesting, because I speak to some younger advisors nowadays, as well as people like ourselves that have been in the industry for a little while, and they all have the same challenges. It's that confidence of,
Mm,
I'm a young advisor. What's somebody that maybe
mm,
might be 20, 30, 40 years older than me? What's
yeah.
going to make them trust me on giving them advice on their money? Is there anything you would add to that kind of like would say, you might say to a young advisor within your firm that, oh, you could get that confidence by doing, what would your advice be?
Yeah, again, that's tough because confidence comes in time, isn't it? The more you do something, the more competent you are at doing it, of course, the more confident you'll become over time. I think there is an element of you sort of talk yourself into the fact, oh, I'm young, whatever. At the time I set up the business, I was in my mid-30s, so I wasn't that young. But compared to some other advisors that have been around the block, and been around for many, many years, I always felt a little bit, I didn't quite have the experience, didn't quite have the wisdom that they'd got. So it's very, very difficult, I think, for young people to get that confidence other than just continuing to do things that take you out of your comfort zone on a regular basis. And that's the only way we learn, isn't it? Like I said, I'd sit there and grip the seat and say to someone, it's £30 a month, hoping that they'd sort of nod. And as I said, nobody said no. So it was like, well, you quickly learn from that you're undervaluing yourselves. Okay, it could have been the opposite, actually. It could have been, we were charging far too much and everyone was saying no, in which case there's a different message coming at you, isn't there? But I don't think there's one sort of a magic wand, if you like, that I could wave in the direction of young advisors. I think it's just, you know, doing the thing that takes you out of your comfort zone, doing it on a regular basis and building up that experience over time. And then you'll get more confident. Then once you feel more confident, then you'll have different conversations that elevate you to where you perhaps want to get to.
Yeah, no, I think that's good advice. I think you can, like, the more time that a new advisor can spend in front of clients, the better, isn't it? So just get as
Mm,
much
yeah,
experience as possible,
yeah.
kind of, yeah, outside your comfort zone, and get as
Mm,
much practice as possible, and you'll kind of learn your way through it much quicker. Um,
absolutely.
so if you were to, so kind of aside from the business, and maybe it's related to what you do in the business for clients, if you could leave no money to your next generation, just one piece of wisdom or advice, what would that be, and why?
Yeah, look, I think that would just simply, well, it'd be a couple of things. It would be do what you want to do in life and not what life or others may expect of you. You know, I know it's very easy to say, oh, if you're passionate about something, do it. And, all these stuff about you'll never work a day in your life and all that. Sometimes quite easy to get caught up in that. But I think I've always loved what I do. And I think if you're passionate about what you do and the way that you work and probably more importantly, to fine tune it a little bit, coming back to, as you mentioned earlier about strategic coach, for example, is about just doing the bits that you're good at and the bits that you enjoy. Going back to 1998 when we first set up the business, we'd answer the phones, we'd type the letters, we'd see the clients in, we'd do absolutely everything. Now, of course, with our little team here, there's 10 of us. Everyone's got their unique abilities and everyone's got their strengths and weaknesses. And I just do the bit that I enjoy and the bit that I think I'm good at, which is just seeing clients and advising them and talking to them and asking them questions and finding out about their lives and what the money's for. So I think it's just a question of do the bits that you're good at and the bits that you enjoy and let go of everything else, because that stuff can drain you, that stuff can wear you down, and it makes the job far less enjoyable.
I think that's brilliant advice, and something that obviously we talk a lot about with the trusted team, because ultimately what you also find by doing that is that you get your time back, because it's usually those other things that aren't the things that you love and that you're really good at that drain a lot of your time. So you get
Yes.
time back, but also you actually end up with a far more profitable business, because those things that you do love and you really enjoy are usually the things that drive all the profit in your business as well, aren't they? So
Yeah,
best
exactly.
of
And
both
and
worlds by doing that.
that's very true. And also the other thing, Charlie, and I'm conscious I didn't quite answer the question. One of the questions you asked me earlier was, what do you do and who do you do it for? So the vast majority of our clients are business owners of some description. So part of our remit, apart from the obvious sort of, financial and tax planning stuff, is to, talk to our business owner clients and say, well, how much free time are you getting? Are you running the business or is the business running you? Do you get enough time to do the things that you want to do in your life, or are you constantly at it? And because we've set the business up in a way that supports us as individuals and we get, as much free time as we want within reason, then there's no reason why we can't set up our business clients in the same sort of fashion so that, they can do the things that they want, but also they've got a very successful, profitable business moving forward.
Brilliant. Yeah, no, I agree. And actually, that prompts me to go back to something that you said right at the start, because you mentioned the term lifetime cash flow forecast. Now, there might be some people listening to this that A, don't know what that is, and B, don't know why it's so important, especially for business owners. So, can you explain why that was such an important part of the business right from the off?
Yeah, because I think coming back to the point I made earlier about, the sale of products, financial advice was very much product sale driven. I think there could be a scenario where, take a business owner, for example, who's going to grow their business over a period of time and sell it, however that succession plan might look, or they're going to have some sort of exit strategy. They might build that up over a period of time and want to know how much they need to sell that for. So, the house they want to live in, the trips they want to go on, the money they want to give to their kids and grandkids, we can work out for them how much that business needs to be worth. Now, of course, there's a danger in just, having all of your eggs in that business basket, because if it goes belly up, then everything goes belly up with it. So we'll certainly have a plan in place to sort of say, well, okay, let's take some money off the table over a period of time and let's, put some resources and grow some wealth in different areas other than the business. But I think it's really important that they understand what the business is for, what that event may or may not look like. And one of the ways that we do that is with cash flow modeling, looking at, what they've got coming in, what their income is, what they're spending, what the growth on their assets might be over a period of time. So they can physically see what that looks like. But there's also some, I work with some business owners, some entrepreneurs that have got absolutely no desire to retire in the true sense of the word whatsoever. They'll carry on because they'll be in a situation, as we described earlier, where they might be just doing 1 or 2 days a week, just doing the bits of the job that they really, really enjoy, and everybody else does everything else. So why would they want to retire? Okay, if that's what they want to do, that's absolutely fine. Again, we can model that and see what that looks like. And if that works for them, then why not? It's their life. If that's what they want to do and that's how they want to achieve it, then we'll help them along the way.
Brilliant. Yeah, I think cash flow forecasting is such a powerful part of the financial planning process, that it just gives people, particularly those people that aren't sort of financially astute, it just gives them real clarity. It can allow them to see the future and see what you're talking about from a financial perspective. So I think it's a brilliant tool. So what's the biggest obstacle blocking you from achieving your business goals at the moment?
I think like a lot of businesses, particularly in financial planning, financial advice, it's the right type of client. You know, we all want to get cherry pick the right sort of client who comes in and, you know, is happy to work with you, is happy to pay what you're worth, who values your advice and buys into the planning process. That's very difficult to achieve. You know, we're very fortunate here at Sound in as much as we've got the vast majority of our clients do fit that description and we get on very well with them. A lot of them have become friends and they refer to us and so on and so forth. But I think for us, if I could, you know, switch one thing on, it would be, you know, more of those sorts of clients coming in and fewer of the ones that ultimately we either can't help or don't want to help, or they don't want to be helped. And so, yeah, I think if we could fine tune it that way, it would make our life a lot easier.
Brilliant.
I know that's the sort of utopian. I don't have that magic wand, but we're working with you, of course, Charlie, and your guys to try and fine tune that as well.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I was just going to say that actually, we've just started working with you on this and essentially helping you build what we call the automated marketing machine. So I think there's a journey that we can go on and help you because I think a lot of what you've done historically is absolutely brilliant. I think we just need to kind of maybe automate some of that and try and make it go out there more. But I think that's but what I will do is I'll put in, obviously you came into that through an event that we did called the Automated Marketing Machine, I think, didn't you? So I'll put a link to that in the show notes for anyone else that wants to check that out. I always refer back to books and kind of documentaries, but particularly books that have helped me on my journey. What book or framework or other thing like that has helped you on your journey, and where do you find it showing up in your business?
Mm. I don't think there's one particular book that I could refer to. There's a couple of things I would say. One I've already mentioned is that we used to follow very closely the ways and methods of Paul Presswood back in the day because he was way ahead of his time, not just with cash flow modeling, but the way he charged clients as well. So from that point of view, we very much based ourselves around the way that Paul and Presswood worked. I think in terms of personal development, I've always loved Jim Rohn and his stuff. You know, it's amazing. Someone sent me a link the other day, a talk that he gave in 1981. I mean, he's been dead several years now, but this talk he gave out in America in 1981, and I watched it from start to finish. It was probably, I don't know, an hour and a half long, and I've heard much of it before. You know, yeah, you find that with personal development, don't you? A lot of this stuff goes round and round. And I sat there and I watched it, I listened to it, and I thought, wow, he was so ahead of his time. I mean, this is like, you know, 45 years ago or whatever it was. And it was fantastic. And I've read some of Jim Rohn's stuff and I've watched him online. I think from a personal development point of view, that stuff just doesn't age. And coming back to your question earlier about young people, I would, you know, I would urge them to listen to the Jim Rohns of this world and really understand what he's saying and how you can grow yourself, which ultimately will grow your business.
I agree. Jim Rohn was absolutely brilliant. Obviously, he was the person that inspired Tony Robbins to go into
Yeah.
coaching. And I mean, so I remember somebody sharing with me a quote from Jim Rohn, which was, "If you want to be wealthy beyond your dreams, read a book a week." And I was like, wow, that's so, but it's so true, isn't it? You know, you read a book a week, you just can't help but, as long as you're reading books that are going to teach you something.
Well, and as long as you're taking action, because I think it's very easy, and I've fallen into this trap before, Charlie. It's very easy to read, and never do anything. You know,
Yes.
you can pick up any book and go, oh, wow, that's a great idea. But if you don't implement that idea, it's pretty useless.
Yeah.
So, whilst I agree with the sentiment, I think it's about following up as well.
I agree. And in fact, in this day and age, in an AI world, it's not like we live in a shortage of knowledge. You know, we don't live in a knowledge gap society, do we? We live in an implementation gap. You know, they say, I think that Dyson was the ninth person to apply for a patent that was based on a vacuum cleaner using a cyclone. But not Dyson's the only one that was the billionaire as a result of actually implementing it, as opposed to just coming up with the idea. So I think that's great advice. So finally, where's the best, if people want to find out more about you, more about Sound Financial Planning, where's the best place for them to track you down?
Well, obviously the website, which is www.soundfp, F for Freddie, P for Peter.co.uk. You can look me up, Paul Spires. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm not a great one for social media. I've got to be honest. I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with social media. However, even at my age, I am learning, how to use it and so on. So look me up on LinkedIn and feel free to connect. I'm always here. People want to pick my brains. I've been around the block, as you can tell, having started the business 27 years ago and been in financial services 9 years prior to that. So yeah, I'm a bit of a dinosaur in that regard, but I've picked up a lot of knowledge and wisdom along the way. So I'm always happy to help people, because that was one of the big things I remember first coming into financial services, were how willing people were to help you. Back in the days before things like the Institute for Financial Planning and so on, there used to be the Life Insurance Association, the LIA. I don't know if you remember that, Charlie. As I said, you're too young, but you go to those meetings and people would help you and they'd say, oh, I do this and I do that. And I was actually gobsmacked. So I'm always open to helping people. So if anyone wants to reach out and pick my brains, feel free.
Brilliant. Paul, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you. Lots of wisdom there that people can implement, both within the financial services industry, but also across any business. So thank you for joining us on the Progress in Practice podcast, which, as a reminder, is brought to you by the trusted team that helps you build a saleable and scalable business. So yeah, Paul, thank you very much. It's been awesome.
Thank you, Charlie, for having me.
If this conversation resonated, you'll find more support, structure, and community inside the trusted team, where ambitious service-based founders come to build businesses that are scalable, saleable, and sustainable. You can find out more at thetrusted.team. And if you're enjoying Progress in Practice, please make sure you follow the show and leave a rating and review. It really helps more founders find these conversations and to bring you better and better guests. So until the next time, keep progressing.